right, everyone. So today we're doing a deep dive into some really fascinating new research. We're talking about the Huanan Seafood Wholesale Market, the one in
Oh,
Wuhan.
yeah, the one that was linked to those early COVID cases.
Exactly. Everyone's been talking about it, right? And this new research, well, it dives into the genetic data from the market, giving us a really close look at what was going on back then.
Yeah, those early epidemiological investigations really hinted that the market was the likely origin point for the pandemic. But this new research takes it a step further, like way further.
Right. This isn't just speculation anymore. We're talking hard evidence, genetic fingerprints, the whole shebang.
Absolutely.
So we've got excerpts from a brand new study fresh off the presses from Cell. The title is a mouthful, but it gives you the gist. Genetic tracing of market wildlife and viruses at the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Catchy, right.
Totally. But they weren't kidding around. They didn't just look at the virus itself. This study analyzed the entire genetic landscape of the market like a snapshot in time.
It's like CSI, but instead of a crime scene, it's, well, a market. And instead of looking for human DNA, they're looking for any kind of DNA and RNA they could find. They use a technique called environmental sampling.
Okay, so what does that mean? Like they just go around swabbing everything?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Surfaces, drain water. They even took samples from the air.
Wow, really? The air?
It's wild. You can find traces of genetic material almost anywhere. And by analyzing those samples, they could piece together a picture of who, or in this case, what was present in the market.
That's amazing. Talk about detective work. So they swapped stalls, collected drain water, basically capturing these genetic snapshots of the market right before the pandemic exploded. What did those snapshots reveal? Did they find SARS-CoV-2 like right there in the market?
Oh, absolutely, they found it. But here's the really interesting part and what makes this study so compelling. They were able to analyze the genetic material of the virus in those samples and trace its lineage.
Lineage. So like its family tree.
Exactly. And guess what? They discovered that the ancestor of the SARS-CoV-2 found in those market samples is genetically identical to the ancestor of the virus that caused the global pandemic.
Wait, hold on. Back up a second. They found the pandemic ancestor, the original strain, hanging out in the Huanan market.
It seems that way.
Wow.
This finding provides really strong evidence directly linking the virus that was circulating in that market to the one that went global. It's a huge piece of the puzzle.
That's incredible. But if I remember correctly, this study didn't just stop at SARS-CoV-2. It went full-on wildlife detective too, right?
Oh, yeah. They didn't just stop at the virus. They wanted to know what animals were there, too. So they looked at the animal DNA in those samples. And get this, they found genetic traces of raccoon dogs, civets, bamboo rats, a whole bunch of animals that we know are susceptible to SARS-CoV-2.
So all the usual suspects were there.
It's like a reunion tour for viruses and their favorite hosts.
Yeah.
And, this isn't entirely surprising. Remember SARS back in 2003?
Yeah.
Many of these same species were implicated back then, too.
It's like the gang's all back together. But remember, these were just environmental samples, right? So we're only seeing a fraction of what was really there.
Exactly.
Makes you wonder, what if they had access to the actual animals? Can you imagine?
The study also found a sort of viral hotspot right in the market.
Oh, really? A hotspot. Tell me more.
So the researchers, they mapped out exactly where they found the virus within the market. Kind of like a treasure map, but for viruses.
Okay.
And guess what? They discovered this one specific stall. They called it Wildlife Stall A for the study. Anyway, this stall had way more positive SARS-CoV-2 samples than any other area in the market.
A viral epicenter. So was this stall like overflowing with those susceptible animals we were just talking about?
It was like a zoo in there. They found the highest concentration of all that wildlife DNA, raccoon dogs, civets, the whole gang right there in stall A. And get this, in some of the positive samples from that stall, there was actually more animal DNA than human DNA.
Wait, hold on. Are you serious? More animal DNA than human? That's insane. It's like they outnumbered the people.
That's exactly what it looks like. It really gives you a sense of just how much wildlife was being traded in that stall.
Wow. Okay, so we've got a potential ground zero, a whole bunch of likely suspects. What else did they find? Did they find any other viruses in those samples besides SARS-CoV-2?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It gets even more interesting. So remember how I said they were looking at all kinds of genetic material, not just the virus itself?
Yeah.
Well, they found traces of a bunch of other mammalian viruses, too. And guess what? A lot of them were found right alongside that wildlife DNA we were just talking about.
Okay, so let me get this straight. They found the likely ancestor of the pandemic virus. Then they found a sort of viral hotspot smack dab in the middle of where a bunch of susceptible animals were being kept. And if that's not enough, they found a whole party of other viruses that infect those same animals.
Bingo.
You've got to be kidding me. This is crazy. Okay, so what kinds of viruses are we talking about here? Give me the rundown.
We're talking raccoon dog parvovirus.
Okay.
Bamboo rat beta coronavirus.
Yeah.
They even found a civet gobavirus.
Wow, and those all infect.
Those specific animals.
So it's not just that these animals were present, they were living, breathing, and shedding all kinds of viruses, potentially.
Potentially, yes.
Which is, let's face it, a recipe for a viral spillover.
And we're not just talking about some abstract possibility here. It's right there in the data.
Speaking of the data, we've been talking a lot about raccoon dogs. What else did the researchers find out about those furry little guys? Did they manage to dig up any more dirt on them?
Oh, yeah. Remember when we were talking earlier about how they use genetic analysis to trace where animals come from?
Yeah, like those DNA ancestry kits.
Exactly.
Okay.
But for animals, well, they took a really close look at the raccoon dog DNA from the market, specifically at this one gene called cytochrome B, which is really helpful for this type of analysis.
Okay.
And what they found is, well, it's pretty interesting.
Okay, hit me with it. What did the raccoon dog DNA reveal?
Well, the DNA from those market raccoon dogs, it didn't match the genetic profiles of raccoon dogs you typically find up in northern China, where a lot of those big fur farms are.
So these weren't your average run-of-the-mill raccoon dogs. These were a different breed. Where did they even come from then?
Well, the genetic analysis suggests they likely originated somewhere in central or southern China.
Wait a minute. That's closer to where they've found bats carrying those SARS-CoV-2-like viruses, right?
You got it.
You're kidding me. This is unbelievable.
It's not a smoking gun, but it's a pretty tantalizing clue. It's possible these raccoon dogs, coming from an area closer to known bat reservoirs, could have picked up the virus and acted as that stepping stone for the virus to reach humans.
Okay, this is like a detective novel coming to life. We've got the market, the animals, the viruses, even a potential route for the virus to jump from bats to humans. Is there anything else in this study that might help us crack this case wide open?
I know, right? It's like we're on the verge of solving the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, every good detective story needs a good twist, right?
Right.
Well, remember when we talked about the study's limitations earlier?
Yeah.
The authors are very clear that while the evidence is strong, they can't definitively say which species directly transmitted SARS-CoV-2 to humans.
So close.
Exactly.
It's a bit of a bummer, but I guess a little mystery keeps things interesting, right? It's like that last chapter you can't wait to read.
Absolutely. And this study gives us a lot to work with, but it's really just one chapter in a much larger story.
That's true.
Every day, researchers are uncovering new clues about this virus and its origins.
So as we get ready to turn the page, let's do a quick recap of what we've learned from this deep dive. What are the key things our listeners should take away from this study?
Well, the biggest takeaway here is this research really points to the Huanan market as the origin point of the COVID-19 pandemic. The presence of all those susceptible wildlife, the incredible diversity of viruses they found, the spatial analysis pointing to that viral hotspot in the market, and then you add on top the genetic tracing that suggests those raccoon dogs may have come from an area closer to bat territory. It really makes you think.
It really does. But like you said, this is just one piece of the puzzle. What other research needs to be done to really nail down how this pandemic emerged? What are we still missing?
That's the million-dollar question. Even though this study couldn't pinpoint the exact species that passed SARS-CoV-2 to humans, just knowing which animals were there is huge. It gives researchers a starting point.
Right. So less about finding that one smoking gun and more about building a really strong case.
Exactly. This study lays a really strong foundation. To truly understand how this pandemic emerged, though, we need even more data. We need more genetic sequencing of animals, both from markets and in the wild. More studies to see which animals have been exposed to these viruses. It's a huge task, but it's so important.
Absolutely. And it really makes you think, what if we had this kind of surveillance in place before a pandemic hit? What if we were actively monitoring these wildlife trade networks, tracking viruses, really getting ahead of these risks?
You're hitting on a really important point. This study really highlights how important the One Health approach really is.
One Health?
Yeah, it's this idea that the health of humans, animals, and the environment are all connected. We can't just ignore what's going on in the animal world and hope for the best. This pandemic, it was a wake-up call.
A wake-up call indeed. And we can't let ourselves forget these lessons.
We can't. This research isn't just about understanding the past. It's about preventing the future.
Well said. And on that note, dear listeners, it's time for us to emerge from this deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you with this thought. Given everything we've learned today, you know about this market, these animals, all these viruses they found. What do you think? What other research or data would really help us finally put this whole COVID-19 origin story to bed? What's the missing piece of the puzzle?
That's a great question, and it's honestly what keeps a lot of scientists up at night. Because, if we could find the answer, it might help us prevent the next pandemic.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, imagine if we could go back in time.
Okay, back to before COVID-19.
Right, back to before any of this happened. If we could go back knowing what we know now, what kind of information would have been really valuable to have? What could have made a difference?
I think a thought experiment, right? Like if we could go back and create the perfect early warning system, what would that look like?
Exactly. And, I think this study, it shows us just how important it is to understand not just what, but where. Like, knowing that those raccoon dogs might have come from a totally different part of China, closer to those bat populations, that's huge. It means we need to be looking at the bigger picture, the entire wildlife trade network, not just isolated incidents.
So we need more boots on the ground, more scientists actually out there tracing these animal highways, figuring out exactly how they're moving from the wild to these markets.
Absolutely. More monitoring, more testing, more genetic sequencing. Basically, we need to build a global database of viruses and the animals they infect. Can you imagine?
A global database?
Yeah, like a viral family tree. We could track their movements in real time, see how they're interacting.
It would be like a weather map, but for viruses.
Exactly. And if we had that kind of information, well, we could see potential outbreaks brewing way before they spill over into humans.
We could get ahead of it instead of always playing catch-up.
Exactly. Being proactive, not reactive.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. And this study really gives us the roadmap to do that.
Yeah.
We just need to be willing to put in the work.
Well, this deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least. And to all our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the heart of the Huanan market. And remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about how interconnected humans, animals, and the environment really are, the better chance we'll have to prevent the next pandemic. Until next time, stay curious, everyone.